This is All Things Fitness and Wellness, uniting industry thought leaders and fitfluencers on the mission to inspire innovation and encourage people to live a life fit and well. Brought to you by British Columbia Personal Training Institute. Learn how to train, gain, and retain clients. Visit bcpti.ca. The first week of February marks National Eating Disorder Awareness Week. Before we get to the podcast, I do want to add a trigger warning, as our guest today will be speaking openly and candidly about their journey to eating disorder recovery. The mission of All Things Fitness and Wellness is for everyone to live a life fit and well. And that's why it was so important for me to invite our guest, Michelle Mackey, onto the show today. Michelle is a Canadian television presenter who's been delighting audiences for over the last decade. She has amassed a huge following on TikTok with her green screen antics, garnering over 350,000 followers and millions of views. However, along her journey to this success, she's been carrying around an inner bully, and that bully is anorexia. Michelle is not alone. According to the Canadian Mental Health Association, over 1 million Canadians meet diagnostic criteria of an eating disorder. That's why it's so important to hear stories like this and build awareness, because for fitness and wellness professionals, there are often a lot of conversations that are centered around weight loss. And one only needs to look to social media to know that the language around diet culture and apps such as Facetune, where people are quite literally manipulating how their bodies appear, can perpetuate unhealthy ideals over what a body should look like. Fitness and wellness professionals are imperative for helping people attain and sustain a healthy lifestyle. But for some people, that ideal they're going for, well, the pendulum simply swings too far. And this can garner physical and mental illness in the form of eating disorders. And we know in the worst cases, this illness can be deadly. So I commend Michelle for opening up on the podcast today. She does a tremendous amount of mental health advocacy, having worked with organizations such as jack.org and the Canadian Mental Health Association. Before we get to the podcast, be sure to hit like and subscribe. We have new episodes weekly, which feature fitness and wellness industry professionals and influencers. And we have kicked off our fitness and wellness tours, where we go around and explore some of the most unique concepts in the Pacific Northwest. We'd love to see your comments on where we should visit next. This is ATFW. Okay, so we're having a bit of a reunion today because Michelle and I started our careers early together at the Weather Network. We have battled the storms and braved it all, but I am so grateful to have you here because we're talking about a topic that is very important to discuss when we are in a space, speaking of wellness and fitness, because the more conversations and vulnerability we have about this, the more people can be helped in not being alone in this journey. And that is why Michelle Mackey is so appreciative to have you today.
Oh, I'm so honored that you asked me, Chrissy, and I loved your intro there. We literally have battled the storms together. Like, that's not a figure of speech.
I know. And you don't get to say that about many people. And I know in the intro that I did for you there, I did mention a trigger warning that we are going to be discussing eating disorders through the podcast today. So if you feel this is something that you're not ready to hear at this time, or it could be triggering for you, feel free to skip along to the next one. But I will say there's so much to be gained from this conversation. So let's learn a little bit more about you, Michelle, because huge mental health advocate, but let's start in the early days of your broadcasting career. I understand there was a grade 4 demo reel.
Yeah, there was definitely a grade 4 demo reel. It was me. I believe I was in my basement reporting on the news. It was not great, but was definitely an early sign that I was supposed to do something in the field of broadcast. That was the early warning sign, I think, from my parents. That, and I liked to talk so much.
You know, I think that's an MO of broadcasters, and we were the kids that always got separated for talking. Well, joke's on you, Mrs. Hulse. It's worked out.
Yeah, look at us now, okay?
So tell me about your journey into getting into on camera, because you have had a really cool ride. You've traveled to Australia. So talk to me through this journey that you took.
So when I was in high school, Chrissy, I always thought I wanted to be an actress. That was my thing. Problem is, couldn't sing. And, with theater, especially when you can't belt it out at all, it kind of limits you. Broadway isn't, isn't for those who can't sing. So I did my first year at Queen's University studying drama, realized very quickly that that was not a road I wanted to take. I think I'm just too much of a control freak, and the idea of not knowing where my next gig would be, where I'd be living in the world, couldn't handle it. So then I decided to go back to Trent University, which is near where I grew up, moved home, figured my life out. And while I was at Trent, I was studying media studies. And there I started to work at Trent Radio, fell in love with radio, wanted to do a master's program after my undergrad, but I also wanted to travel, kill two birds with one stone. I go to Australia for a master's in journalism. And that's where I really discovered on-camera broadcasting, fell in love with it, was able to create a demo reel that was slightly better than the one I made in grade 4. And when I came back to Canada, I applied basically everywhere. We're talking Newfoundland to Saskatchewan, and luckily I end up landing a job at the Weather Network, which is in the Greater Toronto area, not too far from home. And that's kind of how I got my start.
And so obviously you've had this really successful career. Now you're such a recognized face in the city of Toronto, working at City. And then on top of that, you have this TikTok fame, which I will say your acting career has happened. You have crushed it and are honestly such an entertaining person. If you don't follow Michelle already, do yourself the biggest favor of your life and do so.
Thank you. I appreciate the shout out there.
Yeah, you're crushing the game. But I find it interesting where you have somebody on the outside that is such an amazing friend to so many and loving with their family and killing it in their career. And often we don't see what's happening underneath the layers there. We're very good at presenting very well, and there can be things in our lives going on in the background. So through this success story, talk to me about where you can remember your relationship with food starting to become quite complicated.
That's such a good question. I remember it very specifically. It was in grade 11 in high school. And, I mentioned I wanted to go into acting. I got an agent, but this agent was also putting me into some modeling. And one of the caveats was that I had to lose some weight. And so at the time, you hear, oh, you need to lose a few pounds, a few inches, and you think that's normal. But I look back, I was a baby. I was 15 years old being told to lose weight. And as a perfectionist, I began to do that. And yeah, just again, like a trigger warning. I don't want to, I know that it's really tricky to talk about and hear when someone's suffering. So I'm glad you mentioned that off the top. But for me, I began, working out, and then that really led to restrictive eating. And the more weight that I began to lose, the more I was rewarded. I would get more modeling jobs. People would tell me how great I was looking. And it felt really good. And so I realized, well, what if I lost a few more pounds? Wouldn't that feel even better? And it became this nearly deadly cycle that within the span of 6 months started from being really healthy, going to the gym, just eating right, to restricting food, working my body to the point I was about to pass out, my clothes falling off of me, and feeling the need to kind of like hide my body from my family and friends, knowing that maybe I wasn't looking too well, while at the same time in this modeling world being rewarded for the weight I had lost. And that's when it all began.
It's hard to believe when you mention the age, because we all know how we feel in grade 11, like we can rule the world and make these decisions, where in reality, it's exactly that. You're still a child that most certainly is not equipped with emotional intelligence at that point in time to process hearing from an adult agent that you trust.
Yeah.
This is what you have to do to be successful. This is the key to do it. And it's exactly as you say, all of a sudden this behavior then is being rewarded. So what was your emotional state as you went through those early phases there of thinking, hey, I'm getting a reward for this, and then deciding to double down and keep going in that direction?
Well, it started feeling great, but there was always this little voice in the back of my head that was telling me, you are only getting this success because you have lost weight. And so as I became malnourished, what happens physiologically, like within the body, you do when you're malnourished, you lose the ability to feel joy. And I remember it was spring and I was going for a run. And in the spring, things were really starting to bloom, feel colorful. For my whole life, spring was a time of joy and excitement for the season to come. And everything on this run was just colorless. I had no happiness, joy. Everything in my life was just dull. And I look back, and that's a major symptom of anorexia, is depression. And I started to feel depressed. I started to feel anxious. I started just sleeping kind of all the time because my body was so weak. And it was a downhill spiral. And that was definitely the worst part of it, was the emotional side. Just, I'd been such a happy kid and I'd never really experienced sadness like that. And depression is such an overwhelming sense of sadness. It's not that I just broke up with my boyfriend type of sad. It's this overwhelming, all-encompassing black cloud that follows you around.
Well, and such a difficult time period because I'm a little bit older than you, but the Botox helps. But
You look great, kid.
That being said, I know for the era that we were coming up and growing up, there still was a very big stigma around mental health. And dare I say, to a degree, there probably wasn't even all the language for everything that you're feeling at that point in time, nor people looking out for warning signs. So although it may come across sometimes in these situations like people are failing you left and right, we really didn't have a huge amount of awareness over what may have been transpiring there. So talk to me a little bit through this time. Obviously, from an agent's perspective, they're like, cool, you're landing gigs. But from friends, family, were they starting to notice the changes in you?
Definitely. One of my good friends in high school confronted me. I remember it so specifically. So I started to miss a lot of school because of my exhaustion. And I was just telling my parents, I think I was just trying to hide behind, like, maybe it's just like depression, hormones. I've just got a lot of stress in my life. I need a day at home here and there. And I remember I missed 2 days. It was a Monday, Tuesday, and it came after a weekend. So it would have been 4 days. And when I came to school on the Wednesday, I was wearing tighter clothing than I'd worn in a while. And I remember being very restrictive over those 4 days. And when I came back, my friends were like, oh my God, like, wait, what? You notice a little bit here and there, but when you see everyone every day, it's hard to notice. And then I guess just during those 4 days, something happened. And we were eating lunch, and I would eat a very small amount of lunch. And I remember my friends just being very quiet, concerned, but like no one was really saying anything. And someone said something that upset me, and I can't remember what it was. And I remember I took my lunch, what was left of it, and just whipped it in the garbage, like made a scene. And that was so not me, and just stormed to the bathroom crying. And my friend came in and she was like, "Are you not eating?" And I was just like, yeah, like I'm not. And it was the first time I had like said it out loud. And we didn't even know that it was called anorexia at the time. It was just like, "You're not eating." And it was like, well, yeah, but just not as much. And I'm doing all these other things too, but yeah. And then very shortly after, when I realized, okay, something weird is going on, I went online and I put in all of my physical and emotional symptoms into Google. Very clear answer just popped up immediately: anorexia nervosa. Every single symptom, to the point where it was like, you have peach fuzz on your body because you're so thin that your body's trying to warm you up with extra hair, everything. And then when I knew that, it became this very shameful secret at the time. I couldn't tell my parents. I only had that one friend who knew. And it was a few more months before I finally broke down, reached the tipping point, and told my mom.
That would be beyond overwhelming
Yeah.
because, again, how do you process that you're there kind of thing? And as you say, you didn't even have the language till that moment.
No.
You're reading everything and ticking every box. How were you feeling then in those few months till the tipping point? Because that's so much to carry, especially again, at any age, this is really difficult territory to navigate. I don't want to take away from that. But again, we are talking these teenage years where we have so much pressures. We don't know who we are. And then you're dealing with this monumental life experience on top of that.
Yeah, I just felt so incredibly alone. And through that loneliness, my one friend became anorexia. That was the one thing I had that was just mine and would give me comfort in this loneliness. So it was like this terrible cycle. The more I kept the secret, the closer I felt to anorexia, which was this bully of a voice that said, "You need me. It sets you apart. I am making you successful. If other people find out, you'll lose me. And when you lose me, you won't be perfect. You'll have all these terrible things happen to you." And so when I finally told my mom a few months later, yes, it was like this weight was off my shoulder, but then sets in this overwhelming fear of losing anorexia. Like I didn't want to get rid of it. I don't know why.
Turn your passion for fitness into a career with British Columbia Personal Training Institute. Taught by personal trainers, BCPTI combines classroom and in-gym training to give you the tools needed to succeed in the fitness industry and make an impact. With a simple formula focused on service, science, and sales, prospective personal trainers learn how to gain, train, and retain clients. Visit bcpti.ca for more information. It's interesting when you say that, just because prior to Michelle and I hopping on here, we were talking about addiction, and I'm quite open about this. I have two individuals in my family who have suffered really severely with alcoholism, and it's interesting the parallels that you see, because it is like all of a sudden you're exposing this big secret that really has been a source of comfort, which I'm sure to anyone on the outside that's hearing what you're going through and the symptoms in your body is like, how could this possibly be the thing you want to hold on to? But that is where the mental health component comes into such a large degree. Our minds have this incredible ability to create our reality for us. And depending on what lens of perception you're looking through, it is very, very real. So I think how you put it is just such an amazing way to illustrate exactly how fearful that moment must have been felt with. So once you open up to your family, what happens there? Because I'm sure all of a sudden there's a collision now of, we want to help you. And you're like, I don't know if I'm ready for that help.
That's such a brilliant way to put it, of this collision between emotions. My parents immediately pulled me out of modeling, which at the time I realized was something I had to do. I could not continue to be rewarded, to be told that you are perfect when I'm looking skeletal. That just had to happen. So I was actually okay with that. But my parents put me into an intensive outpatient treatment. And that was where things got very difficult. I had to meet with a dietitian. I was no longer in control of my food. It was very strict. It was very, here is what you need to eat at breakfast, lunch, dinner. I remember it'd be like, you need to have 1 cup of milk. And I would be like, okay, well, I'm measuring out that 1 cup of milk. So I'm not having an ounce more, or, all of this. And then at the same time, you're working with a doctor and you're working with a therapist to try and get to the emotions. But I will be honest with you, through this whole process, which was the course of another 6 months, I did not want to get rid of it. I was not ready to get rid of it. I looked around the world and I thought, people who are pretty are successful. And I didn't feel like I was pretty if I was bigger. I felt like I wasn't pretty the way I was before. And if I wasn't pretty, then how would I ever be a successful person? How would I make people proud? How would I make myself proud? And so I gained a few pounds. I told my parents everything was okay. And it never really left. But I stopped going to therapy and I went to university, and the cycle started all over again. And anorexia would stay with me for 7 more years of my life. it just kept cycling. I would gain a few pounds, I would lose a few pounds. It just didn't let me live for 7 full years of my life. I feel like I try and frame it like I had this for a reason. I had this because I want to help people. Because if I kind of don't look at it like that, I'm like, I lost 7 years of my life. Like I can't get back. So I need to do something with that for myself. And not everyone needs to do that. You know, we learn so much in these years of illness too, and that in itself is enough. But for me, it makes me emotional when I think about the years that I lost.
One thing that I would say, and I don't want to take away from that emotion because absolutely your emotions are 1000% valid. But what I will say to you is that through your talents as Michelle, as a human, not on the physicality, you have become a person of influence. And that is through your hard work and tenacity, because the broadcasting industry, especially a decade ago, to bang down the doors, was extremely competitive and difficult. And you are at the forefront of that. And not only, but you're slaying the social media game at the same time. And I say this and I recognize this because you have earned that person of influence and you are using it. Your voice, the voice that the teachers back in the day would separate you for talking, to make a difference in people's lives, because this level of vulnerability that you are sharing in this moment, these are the moments that hit people here when they need to hear something. And it could be twofold, whether it's somebody that's listening that is resonating and thinking, oh my God, that was me. Oh my God, that is me. Or, oh my God, I know someone. How can I help and be a supportive individual through this journey? So again, I'm not taking away from what that 7 years feels like, but I think it is really important for you to hear that and be reminded of that because you, the person, have done that.
Thank you. That means so much to me. And I remind myself of that too, and how much I grew during that period. And that just means so much. So thank you for saying that.
No, absolutely. I think, that's the whole point even of this project. I'm like, it is about lifting people and it is about raw and honest conversation because quite honestly, even the last couple of years, we know things got weird. We all went
Yeah.
inward. We probably all had to battle whatever demons we had and celebrate whatever wins we had. And I think on the other side of it, there's been this renewed sense of openness amongst people. And that's what we get to tap into here. So as you come out of those 7 years, what was that moment? Or I don't want to say what was that switch for you, because I understand it's a long process, but where did you start to see things shift to a point that you wanted to be well?
It was so interesting because I'm not even sure if it was something conscious that happened to me. In the 7th year of this, I was still living in Australia. I went through a pretty rough breakup, my first love. And after that, I moved home and I just dedicated myself to finding a job at a time when I very well could have dedicated myself to letting the eating disorder take over and run wild. I mean, I was vulnerable. But instead, I just like this fire lit inside of me. I was like, no, I got to find a job. I got to follow my dream. I've done all this schooling. Let's go. Let's see what happens. And so then I land this job at the Weather Network. And I remember just being so focused. You know what it's like. You don't have a script. You're ad-libbing. You need to know the weather. You're live on TV for the first time in your life. And so I just devoted so much of myself to this. And during those few first months, I remember having this moment being like, interesting, I haven't felt guilty about food in a really long time. And I had definitely gained some weight. And I would say I was at a healthy weight. And I wasn't thinking about food as much because I wasn't starving all the time. My body was full. So I no longer had to plan my day around when I was eating, where I was eating, who I was eating with, how I was eating, the spoon I would use. None of that was affecting me anymore. And I also had this realization of like, okay, I used to get really guilty whenever I would eat something I deemed bad, a bad food. Let's say I had a dessert. Okay, so for 24 hours, I'm feeling guilty. Or until I work out, I'm feeling guilty. But then it goes away. So I was like, I mean, if the guilt is going to go away in 24 hours, can't I just let it go away now? Because there's not really a point of feeling it for 24, 48 hours if I just know it's going to go away. And then I just like remember thinking about that and having that realization. And I hadn't taken like an anti-anxiety pill in a while, which I used to have like if I was having like panic attacks or something. And I was like, whoa, it's been like almost 6 months to a year that I haven't done this. And that's kind of when I realized, like, I think I found a place of recovery for me. Now, I would be lying to you if I said it does not affect me whatsoever anymore. There are still things that stick with me. For example, I do not have a scale in my home. And I have told my fiance that is something I just don't want. I find that triggering. And in the same way that an alcoholic doesn't have booze in the house, I don't want a scale in the house. That's just for me. I just don't want that. So there are things I need to do to maintain my recovery. But for me, I've reached that place.
I'm so glad as well for your health and the fact that you have used your voice. So talk to me. Obviously, I know you've worked with Jack.org, been a huge voice for the Canadian Mental Health Association. So let's dive into now when you've become this advocate. What were sort of the first approaches that were made there, and how did you feel using your voice of influence to speak in this way?
So it was after my first year at the Weather Network, and I started to realize, okay, I've got this platform. Okay, I'm in a place of recovery. Maybe I should do something here. And so I reached out to the Canadian Mental Health Association, and I reached out to their Peterborough branch because that's the small town where I'm from. And I sent an email and I said, here's a little bit about my story. I'm interested in doing some advocacy work. Is this something you'd be interested in working with me for? And they said, yeah, we've actually got our general meeting coming up. Would you be interested in speaking at that? And I was like, okay. And I had a meeting initially with a great guy named Jack, and he works there. He's awesome, still a good friend of mine. And he said, come in and just like read me your speech, and then we can go over, where it could go, how we could kind of frame it for this general meeting. And I remember I read him the speech, and then there was just this silence after, and he was just kind of like, oh, we're good. Like, don't change anything. Like, just, that's fine. Yeah, you're good. And so I thought, okay, maybe like this has some impact. And so a few weeks later, I read it at the general meeting, and I had this piece of paper, and I remember it was just shaking, and I'm trying so hard not to cry. But even as I talk to you today about it, I always, no matter how many times I talk about it, I still get a little bit teary when I go through it. But I think that's just part of the process and being vulnerable. I don't think I've ever been able to get it through one of those speeches without at least getting like a little quiver in my voice, but it was amazing. And then everyone stood up and clapped for me, and I just thought, oh my gosh. And then my dad reached out to me a few weeks later and said, you wouldn't believe this. One of my friends was at that general meeting, and his daughter is suffering, and he told his daughter about what you went through and how you recovered, and it gave her so much hope. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to do this again. That's it. I've got to do this.
And talk to me about some of the feedback that you have gotten through the years of using your voice, because exactly that one person that took that home impacts another life there. There is a huge ripple effect in using your voice this way.
There is. And I think as well, we look back to when I was in high school and I didn't really have a word for what I was feeling. And then there was all the shame, and it was a big secret. And so the more you talk about it, the more, it becomes normalized and something acceptable to be dealing with. And the best feedback isn't a group of people clapping for you. It really is maybe that one person who comes up after and says, hey, like, you affected me in some positive way. I did a speech a few years ago in Peterborough again, and it was at a high school, and there were students from all different high schools that had come out to see it. And afterwards, a mom asked if I would speak to her daughter privately. And she was such a sweetheart, and she was in the depths of an eating disorder herself and was very shy. And I just kind of told her, like, you remind me so much of myself. And look at me now. Like, you can get through it, and you can have an amazing, purposeful, joyful life after this. It is possible. And so those are the individual, those moments, those individuals just make it all so worth it.
Well, and I appreciate so much how you said there, referring back to your high school time where you didn't really have that voice. So I think you just know firsthand how much it would have meant and how powerful that could have been. And maybe you could have reached the joy sooner if there was somebody like that there. And that's what you're paying forward. I think that's, again, when we look at the trials of our life and you start to dig into them, you realize sometimes there can be a bit of purpose there. And without a doubt, I feel like this is most definitely one of yours because you're doing beautiful things with the pain and suffering. And that's not always easy to do because a lot of times we're faced with the choice. Is this the thing that crushes me or is this the thing that builds me? And you really have used it as a building tool. I'm curious if there's somebody that is listening to this and it is resonating and they are in that space where they want to make a shift or reach out, what would you say for them?
The first thing I always say is just tell one person. Do not take this on by yourself. My life began to change for the better when I opened up to that friend, when I opened up to my mom. Just find one person to talk to and tell them how you're feeling, a person you love and trust. That is the first step. From there, you can decide with help, what is the course of action we take to find a place of recovery? How do we do this? And it is possible. And I would also say, if there is someone you love and trust that you are concerned about, privately, you can tell, even if you're not comfortable asking, hey, are you okay? A quick text, just thinking about you, here for you. You ever need to talk? Love you. I'm here. Something as small as that can make a huge difference. And in some cases, honestly, can be the difference between life and death, because as we know, these mental illnesses are very deadly.
I really appreciate, because that quite literally was going to be my follow-up, because I think a lot of times we can be nervous in those situations that we're going to offend someone or jeopardize our relationship with them. And I really, really like the language you use of that, of not even necessarily having to put the onus of them of the question, but just letting them know that that little hand is there if they want to reach out to it. So that's a beautiful, beautiful way to be a beacon of light in I'm sure what's a very dark space for people living through those moments. I'm going to put you on the spot here. I do this to everyone.
Go for it.
But I basically like to leave people with a little motivational quote or a nugget of wisdom that you personally love and live by, something that can fuel our day. So what would be yours?
Oh, that's such a good question. I have a few that come to mind, and I would say something that would maybe round out this conversation is, for me in my life, I experience joy and happiness and have such an appreciation for that because I have been in the valley, the depths of despair. I've seen that darkness. And so in that sense, I'm so grateful for my joy and happiness, maybe grateful to a point that I wouldn't have appreciated otherwise. And so that's something. And as simple as it sounds too, if anyone's listening who is struggling, I promise you, recovery is possible. It is. You might not think it. And anorexia, your eating disorder, is going to tell you it's not, and is going to convince you that you don't want to get rid of it. Say goodbye to that bully. Recovery is possible.
Michelle Mackey, thank you so much. I know that it's not always easy to show up in a digital space and have that level of vulnerability. But I really, really appreciate you taking the time and sharing the space with me, because these conversations need to happen. It was personally really important to me. I could not in good conscience have a fitness, wellness podcast where obviously we talk about the full realm of all the things. And this is part of it too. Our relationship with physical fitness, our relationship with food can be very complicated. It's something that bleeds in and out of the space. So thank you for adding your voice to this.
And thank you for amplifying that voice and talking about it. And I'm so proud of the decisions you've made and the path your career is going on. So thank you so much for having me.
You've just listened to All Things Fitness and Wellness, brought to you by the British Columbia Personal Training Institute. Learn how to train, gain, and retain clients. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you never miss out on hearing from industry thought leaders and influencers. We are on a mission to help everyone live a life fit and well.